The sun lit up the sidewalk outside Whitman and Dorsey law offices with a kind of cruel brightness. Elijah Brooks stood there, clutching the folded funeral program of the woman who had raised him. The edges were creased from his grip, and though he wore a clean suit, his eyes were heavy with loss. He hadn't come to fight. He had come to mourn. But the moment the will was read aloud and his name never appeared, everything shifted. The room had grown quiet. His adopted siblings, Andrew and Caroline Whitman, sat across from him, their expressions unreadable, but the silence between them spoke volumes. The family's longtime attorney, Gerald Dorsey, cleared his throat, avoided Elijah's gaze, and said simply, "I'm sorry, Elijah. Your name isn't listed in the updated will." It didn't make sense. Mary Whitman, his mother, had always been clear. Elijah had been 6 when she took him in, a quiet boy with big eyes and a second-hand backpack. He'd been through 4 foster homes by then and had learned to keep his voice low and his expectations lower. But Mary hadn't treated him like a guest. She'd made him a promise. "You're safe here, Elijah. You're home." He believed her. The Whitman house was the picture of suburban serenity. White fence, trimmed hedges, warm Sunday dinners. But that ideal came with shadows. Andrew and Caroline, Mary's biological children, never fully embraced Elijah. At first, they called him the foster kid, even after the adoption was finalized. They made subtle efforts to remind him of his place. Whispers at school, cold shoulders at family events, birthday cards signed with just their names. Still, Elijah stayed silent. He worked harder, excelled in school, helped around the house. He believed if he just became good enough, they'd see him not as a guest, but as a brother. Mary did. Always. She tucked notes into his lunch. Stayed up reading to him when nightmares kept him awake. Told him, "You matter. You always will. I've made sure of it." She said it like a fact, not a promise. Elijah had never asked her to. It wasn't about money. It was about acknowledgement that he hadn't imagined the love, the life, the family. But when Mary grew ill, things shifted. The house filled with tension. Andrew and Caroline rarely visited, and when they did, they circled her belongings like vultures, whispering about property and assets. Elijah stayed. He brought her tea, helped her into bed, read her poetry when she couldn't sleep. One night, she'd asked him to install a small security camera in her study. "I just want peace of mind," she whispered. "I think someone's been looking through my things." He didn't ask questions. He just did it. And then she was gone. At her funeral, Elijah didn't cry. He stood silent in a sea of mourners who barely acknowledged him. He folded the program over and over in his hand like a charm, holding on to the woman who had once looked him in the eye and called him her son. And now, Gerald Dorsey sat across from him, claiming Mary had changed her will. "There's only one copy," Dorsey said. "This version. Signed, witnessed, and notarized." The document left everything to Andrew and Caroline. The house, the bank accounts, the stocks. Not a single mention of Elijah. He hadn't expected millions. He hadn't expected applause. But he never expected to be erased. Except something didn't feel right. Mary had been clear, she'd said, equal, always. And then Elijah remembered the camera. That night, he returned to the Whitman home, now half empty, cold, the warmth gone. In his childhood bedroom, still neat with folded sheets and the old bookshelf Mary helped him build, he opened his laptop. He logged into the private cloud account. It took minutes to load, the signal slow. Then the screen came to life. A series of clips, each with dates, each tied to the study. He clicked one, 12 days before her death. Mary sat at her desk. Her shoulders were hunched, her skin pale, but her eyes were sharp. "This is for clarity," she said into the lens. "My will states that everything I own is to be split equally between my 3 children. Yes, 3. Andrew, Caroline, and Elijah Brooks. He is my son." She held up the will, the signed copy, in full view of the camera. "If anything happens to this document," she continued, her voice steady, "know that I never changed my mind." Elijah paused the footage. His hands trembled. He clicked the next clip. It was dated 4 days later. Dorsey entered alone. Calm, confident. He walked directly to her drawer, removed the will Mary had shown, replaced it with another, put the original into his briefcase. Then, Andrew stepped into view. "Done?" he asked. Dorsey nodded. "They won't question it." Elijah stared at the screen, stone still. They hadn't just robbed him. They'd buried his name, his mother's voice. He downloaded the footage, placed it on a flash drive, and slid it into his jacket. The next morning, he returned to Dorsey's office. "I need 5 minutes," he said. Dorsey looked up, unsurprised. "Elijah, I told you." He placed the flash drive on the desk. "What's this?" "Clarity." Dorsey reached for it, but Elijah raised a hand. "You should think very carefully about the last time you were in my mother's study." Dorsey stilled. "She asked me to install a camera," Elijah said calmly. "Turns out, she was right to be afraid." The silence in the room grew heavier with every second. "I suggest," Elijah added, "you fix this before I send copies to the state bar, the police, and the press." Dorsey blinked, then nodded, small, hollow, defeated. At the second reading of the will, Elijah sat quietly at the long oak table. Andrew was there. Caroline, too. Dorsey sat at the head, pale and twitchy. The tension in the room was electric. Elijah stood, plugged the flash drive into the screen. The first clip played. Mary's voice filled the room. "Everything I own is to be divided equally among my 3 children." Gasps. Caroline dropped her phone. Andrew's mouth fell open. Then, the second clip. Dorsey switching the will. Andrew standing by. The room went still. Elijah turned to face them. "You tried to erase me." No one spoke. Then the door opened. 2 officers entered. "Mr. Dorsey?" one asked. Dorsey sputtered. This is a misunderstanding." But it didn't matter. They walked him out. Quiet. Stoic. The way Elijah had learned to be. The original will was reinstated. Charges filed. Public outrage followed. The media storm tore through Dorsey's firm. Andrew vanished from social media. Caroline mailed a letter months later, half-hearted and late. Elijah never replied. Not because he hated her, but because he didn't owe anyone proof of his worth anymore. His mother had already done that. Today, Elijah stood outside a small office on Parker Street. A modest sign on the window read, Whitman Justice Collective. Inside were donated chairs, 2 computers, and shelves of legal guides and history books. It wasn't elegant, but it was powerful. He walked in, smiled at the young woman behind the desk. "Anyone stop by?" "A kid from Sycamore," she said. "Thinks his uncle forged some guardianship papers." Elijah nodded. "Let's help him." This was why he stayed, why he built something. Not to prove a point, but to ensure others like him never got silenced. A boy passed outside with his father, peeking at the window sign. "What's that place?" he asked. His father replied, "That's where people go when someone tries to steal what's rightfully theirs." The boy looked up at Elijah and smiled. Elijah smiled back, quiet. Because in the end, truth didn't need to shout. It only needed someone willing to carry it. And Elijah Brooks would carry it every day.